On Wednesday, the 24th of June, 2026, at 4 minutes past 6 in the evening, the ground beneath northern Venezuela came apart. A magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck the coast near La Guaira, and 39 seconds later, before the first had even finished, a second and larger shock, a magnitude 7.5, ruptured 10 kilometers below the surface on the San Sebastian Fault, the seam where the Caribbean plate grinds west against South America. It was the most powerful seismic event the country had seen in more than a century. There was no national alarm. There is no earthquake warning system in Venezuela. The only warning anyone received was a few seconds pushed to some phones by the Android network, from the devices of strangers further up the coast who felt it first. It was the dinner hour. The whole coast was home, pots on the stove, children still awake, the light going gold over the sea. And then, in under a minute, more than 250 residential buildings in La Guaira alone came down. The district of Katia La Mar was the worst hit. The international airport at Maiquetía, the country's main gateway, was badly damaged. The power failed across the entire coast at once. By the morning of the 26th, the acting president would confirm more than 580 dead, with thousands injured, and the count, in her own words, still rising. Funvisis would record more than 140 aftershocks. La Guaira was declared a disaster zone. Into that zone, that first night, went the men and women whose job it is to walk toward the screaming when everyone else is running from it. This is the testimony of one of them. His name is Wilmer Salazar. He is 54 years old, a fire and rescue chief with 30 years on this coast. A man who stopped believing in God somewhere around the 1,000th body, and who, on the worst night of his career, standing in the dust between two collapsed buildings, with the lives of children on both sides, and only one team to give, heard something call him by his name. What follows is his account, recorded 2 days later in his own words. We have changed nothing but what had to be changed to protect the living.
My name is Wilmer Salazar. I am 54 years old. For 30 years I have been a firefighter and a rescue man on this coast, and for the last 9 of them I have been comandante, the chief, of the station that covers La Guaira and Maiquetía and the climbing barrios behind them. I am telling you my rank first, the way I would at the start of any report, because I need you to understand what kind of man I am before I tell you what I saw. Not a religious man. Not a soft man. A man who has spent 3 decades being the one they call when a building has already decided to come down, and who learned a long time ago to do the arithmetic that no one outside this work ever has to do. Which scream you follow, and which one you let go. I am recording this on the 26th of June. It is 2 days after. I am in the back of a fire station that is still half standing, in a storage room behind the bay, sitting on a crate of bottled water that the Spanish brought in, because there is nowhere else in this building where a man can be alone. There is a radio on the floor that I cannot make myself turn off, low, full of voices calling grids that I know by heart. My hands smell of concrete dust and diesel and something underneath that I will not name into this camera. Every few minutes the floor moves, an aftershock. Funvisis has counted more than 140 of them now, and every time it moves, the men in the bay go quiet and look up, the way you learn to, and then they go back to work. I have never spoken into a phone like this in my life. I give orders. I do not give speeches, so forgive me if I do this badly. But I owe somebody the truth, and I have run out of people I can say it to with my mouth. I was born in Maiquetía in 1972, 3 streets up from the sea, in the kind of house where you could hear the port all night, the cranes, the ships, the men shouting on the docks before the sun came up. My father, Wilmer Salazar, worked that port his whole life, a stevedore, a man built like a piece of the machinery he loaded, who came home smelling of salt and rust and went out again before I woke. He was not a gentleman. He was a man who believed that the world owed you nothing and that a son's job was to be useful. My mother, Rosa, took in sewing and cleaned the offices of a shipping company at night, and she was the one who prayed, quietly, on her own, a small woman with a rosary worn smooth as a river stone, who lit a candle to the Virgin of Coromodo in the corner of the kitchen every single evening of my childhood. I grew up between a father who trusted only his own back and a mother who trusted only her God. And I will be honest, for most of my life I thought they were both fooling themselves. The port broke my father's body by the time he was 60. The prayers did not keep my mother from dying frightened and in pain. I drew my conclusions early. I want to be plain about this, because the rest will not make sense otherwise. I have not really believed in God since I was a young man, and I can almost tell you the year I stopped. It was 1999. You may not know what happened here in 1999, because the world mostly did not look. For days it rained on the Avila, the green mountain that stands between Caracas and this coast. Rained the way it had not rained in a century, and on the 15th and 16th of December, the whole face of that mountain came down at once. Not water, the mountain itself. Mud the color of wet ash carrying boulders the size of trucks, coming through the towns on the coast in the dark while people slept. They have never agreed on how many died. Some say 10,000, some say 30. Whole neighborhoods were simply gone by morning, paved flat under 20 feet of mud, and a good part of them are still under there now, a buried country beneath the one they rebuilt on top. I was 27 years old and 7 years into the job. That was my first big one. That was where I started counting, because that is a thing nobody tells you when you are young and you take this work because you want to be the one who runs in. They tell you that you will save people, and you will. You do. It is real. What they do not tell you is that you will also keep a ledger. Every man in this job keeps it, whether he means to or not, the column of the ones you reached, and the column of the ones you did not. And the second column is always longer, and it never stops growing, and you carry it home in your chest like a second skeleton. In 1999, I pulled the living out of the mud for the first 3 days, and the dead for the next 2 weeks. And somewhere in there, I stopped being able to feel my own face, and I have never entirely gotten it back. I used to think God was somewhere up the mountain, watching, deciding. After 1999, I decided that if he was watching, I did not want to know him. And if he was not, then at least the mud was honest. The mud never pretended to love anybody. People ask me, the few who ask, when exactly I stopped believing. And the honest answer is that I cannot give them a day, because it was not a day, it was a body count. It happened somewhere around the 1,000th body, and I do not say that to be hard. I say it because it is the truth, and the truth is the only thing I have left to give. You do not lose your faith all at once in this work. You lose it the way a rope loses its strength, one fiber at a time, under a load it was never built to carry, until one ordinary afternoon you put your weight on it and it is simply gone, and you cannot even remember which pull was the one that finished it. I went to my mother's funeral and felt nothing where the faith should have been. I stood in the church I was baptized in, and the words came out of my mouth from memory, the way a man recites a phone number for a house he no longer lives in. I was not angry at God. You cannot be angry at an empty chair. I had simply stopped setting a place for him. What I had instead was the work, and I gave it everything that was left of me. Let me give you the numbers, because numbers are the one kind of truth I have never doubted. 30 years in the Bomberos, 9 as Comandante of this command. I have lost count of the fires, but I have not lost count of the buildings. I have been first through the door of more collapsed structures than any man I know still breathing. The apartment block in Katya Lamar that pancaked in 2007. The warehouse fire on the Port Road that took 2 of my men. The landslides every rainy season that this coast treats like weather because to us they are. I trained under the old Vargas men, the ones who came up after the Deslave, and I trained the young ones who work for me now. And I taught every one of them the same first lesson my own teacher beat into me. The building is always lying to you. It looks solid. It is not. The part that is still standing is the part that is about to kill you. Trust the structure, and the structure will bury you with the people you came to save. I have redlined buildings, called men back out of them screaming that there were still voices inside, because I could read the load the way my father could read the sea, and I would rather a man hate me alive than thank me dead. I have been right almost every time, almost. The almost is the part that does not let me sleep, and I will get to it, because I have decided that if I am going to tell this, I am going to tell all of it. I should tell you how it works, the choosing, because that is the center of everything, and I do not think people understand it. When a building comes down with people inside, you do not get to save everyone. I need you to actually hear that, not nod at it. You arrive and the structure is calling. There are voices, sometimes many voices, sometimes a whole building's worth of voices, coming up out of the rubble from places you cannot see. And you have minutes, not hours, before the dust does its work or the next aftershock finishes what the first one started. And you have to decide with your own mouth, out loud, in front of your men, which voice you are going to walk toward. And the moment you walk toward one, you are walking away from the others. That is the job. That is the part that is not in any manual. You become the man who decides which mother gets her child back and which one does not. And you do it on instinct, on training, on the cold reading of a structure, in the time it takes to draw a breath, and then you live with it. I had made that choice 100 times in 30 years. I was good at it. I told myself that being good at it was the same as it being bearable. It is not the same. I know that now. There was one I have never told anyone about, and I am going to tell it now because I think it is the real beginning of the end of my faith, more than the mud, more than the 1,000th body. In 2011, there was a fire in a tenement in the old part of Maiquetía, 4 in the morning, and I had a young man under me, Eduardo Briseño, 23 years old, his mother's only son, the kind of kid who ran in before you finished giving the order. There was a woman screaming from a window on the 3rd floor, and I sent Eduardo up the interior stair because the structure read sound to me. It read sound. I would have staked my life on it, and I did stake a life on it, only it was not mine. The stair was sound. The floor above the stair was not. It came down on him while the woman climbed down a ladder on the far side of the building and lived. I carried him out myself. I have carried a lot of men out, but that one I carried out knowing I had read the building right, and the building had killed him anyway. And that is a different kind of weight than a mistake. A mistake you can learn from. Being right and burying him anyway, there is nothing to learn from that. There is only the question it leaves in you, the one I could never answer and finally stopped asking. Then what is any of it for? I went to his mother's house. I could not look at her. After Eduardo, I stopped praying entirely, even the empty way, even out of habit, because praying felt like an insult to a man I had sent up a sound stair to die. For years, my wife Maritza used to wait up for me, and for years I would come home and not be able to tell her any of it. And one day she stopped waiting up, and a while after that she stopped being there at all, and I did not entirely blame her. You cannot live with a man who keeps a graveyard behind his eyes and will not let you in to tend it. We have a son, Anibal, named for my father, 26 now, who became a firefighter too, against everything I told him, against everything I had seen happen to men like Eduardo. And that, God help me, that becomes important later, so hold on to it. Now I have to tell you about Wednesday, the 24th of June. I have gone over it so many times in the last 2 days that I am afraid of wearing it smooth, of turning it into a story, and it is not a story. It happened. It is still happening out there in the grids the radio keeps calling. It was an ordinary evening, the dead middle of an ordinary week. Just past 6. The whole coast was home. That is the thing about the hour, 6 in the evening. Everyone home, the children still up, the pots on the stove, the light going gold over the water the way it does here in June. I was at the station. We were standing down, drinking the bad coffee, my men giving each other a hard time. An ordinary shift winding toward an ordinary night. There is no national earthquake alert in this country. I want you to sit with that. We are built on the seam where the Caribbean plate grinds against South America. Geologists compare our fault to the San Andreas. And there is no siren, no system, nothing. Some people that evening got a warning from their telephones. A few seconds, a thing the Android system does now, pushed out from the phones of strangers up the coast who felt it first. A few seconds. That is the only warning this country gave its people. At 4 minutes past 6, the first one hit. The 7.2, though of course I did not know the number then, nobody did. The numbers come later. The numbers are for afterward. I knew it in my body before I knew it in my head. The way you know it after 30 years. Not a tremor, not the little ones we get and ignore, but the deep heave, the one that comes up through the slab and into the soles of your boots and tells you, in a language older than words, that the ground itself has stopped being something you can stand on. The men were already moving. We are trained for the floor to betray us. It is the one thing we rehearse. We got out into the yard. And I remember standing there in the open with the whole station shaking and the cranes down at the port screaming on their rails and thinking, with the cold part of my mind that never fully shuts off, that is a big one. That is the biggest one I have felt. And then, before the first had even finished, 39 seconds later, the second one came. The 7.5, the big one. Larger than the first and shallower, 10 kilometers straight down right under us. If the first shock was the ground warning us, the second was the ground making good on the threat. The first one had cracked the coast. The second one brought it down. I watched it happen from the station yard. I watched a city I had spent 54 years in begin to fall. The building across the avenue shed its whole face into the street like a man's jaw coming off. Somewhere up the hill there was a sound I have only heard a handful of times. The sound a structure makes when it stops being a structure, that comes up through your feet and your teeth before it ever reaches your ears. And then another, and another, all over the coast at once, a city of those sounds. The lights went, the whole coast lights, all at once, gone. And the gold evening light was suddenly the only light there was. And through it came the dust, rising everywhere, building after building, giving itself up to the dust, until the dying sun turned the color of an old bruise. and then it was quiet. For one breath, maybe two, the whole coast was quiet. And then the quiet ended, and the screaming began, and it came from everywhere at once. I have heard a building full of voices before. I have never heard a coast full of them. I gave the orders, every man, every truck, full call out, mutual aid, all of it, and we went up into Katia Lamar, into the worst of it, into streets that were no longer streets. And I want to tell you that my 30 years held, that the training took over, that I was the commandante and I did my job. And for the first hour I did. We pulled 3 people out of the first block before the dust even settled. I was reading structures on the run, calling which ones could be entered and which ones would kill you. The old skill working the way it always had. But the coast kept falling. The aftershocks kept coming, each one bringing down what the big one had only cracked. And the voices kept multiplying, and somewhere in that first night, I came around a corner of what had been a residential street, and I stopped. Because in front of me there were 2 buildings down. Not 1, 2, maybe 40 meters apart, and both of them were full of voices. And I had 1 team with me and the equipment to work 1 collapse. And I could hear them. I could hear the children in both. And the dust was coming, and the next aftershock was coming. And every second I stood there choosing was a second stolen from whichever side I did not choose. 30 years of the ledger, and I had never stood between 2 like that. With my own son's crew 30 minutes out and the dark coming down and the whole weight of it on my mouth, on the next word I was going to say. I lifted my hand to point. I had made the call. I had chosen the building on the left, the larger one, the louder one, because that is the training. That is what the numbers say. More voices, more lives. You go where the most are. And that was when I heard my name come out of the dust.
Hold him there for a moment. A 54-year-old fire chief frozen between 2 collapsed buildings, his hand half raised, the dust rising, the dark coming down. Both structures full of voices and only 1 team to give. 30 years of training had built him for exactly this choice, and 30 years of training had also taught him its terrible arithmetic, that to walk toward one voice is to walk away from the others. He had made that choice 100 times. He had never made it with what came next. If you have made it this far, take 1 second to do something for him and for this channel. We are new here, and the only way a story like this finds the people who need it is if you tell the algorithm it matters. So if it does, subscribe, tap the like, and turn on the bell so the next testimony reaches you. That is the whole ask. No money, no sermon. Just don't let this disappear. And one more thing, because it is the reason this channel exists. Testimonies like this one are gathered in a book called Real Encounters. The link and the QR code are on your screen, and we are still collecting them. So if you have ever lived something you cannot explain, a voice, a presence, a moment in the dark that should not have happened, we want to hear it. It is completely free to send us your own story. There is a link on your screen and in the description, and some of them end up in the next book. Because what Wilmer Salazar heard in the dust between those 2 buildings is the part he has not been able to tell anyone with his own mouth. It is the part his own men look at the ground when he tries to explain. It is the reason there is going to be a review, and the reason he is recording this at all. Here is the rest of it, in his words.
I heard my name come out of the dust. Wilmer. Not shouted. Not from one of my men. I know every voice on my crew the way you know your own children's footsteps, and this was none of them. It came from the gap between the 2 collapses, from the cloud of concrete dust that hung in the dead air between the building on the left and the building on the right. And it was said the way no one had said my name in years, maybe ever. Not Comandante, not Salazar. Wilmer. The name my mother used, the name from before any of the rank, said in the Spanish of this coast, our Spanish, with the soft music we put on the end of things, the accent of my Katia and not of anywhere else. Said by someone who was not guessing, said by someone who knew exactly who I was and was not impressed and was not afraid. I turned toward it with my hands still half raised, still pointing at the building I had chosen, and there was a man standing in the dust between the two collapses. I have to be careful here because I have spent 2 days watching what happens to people's faces when I get to this part, and I do not blame them. I had that face my whole life. So I will tell it the way I would tell it to a board of inquiry, plainly, and let it sound however it sounds. There was light in that gap, and the light was wrong. The power was out across the whole coast, I have told you. The lights had gone all at once, and there were no headlights there, no flashlight, no fire, nothing that could throw light, and yet I could see him, clearly, in a soft light that had no source I could find because the light was coming off of him. Not shining on him, off of him, out of him, the way heat comes off the road in August, except it was light, and by it I could see the rebar and the broken glass and the gray dust hanging in the air, and a man standing barefoot in the middle of all of it as if it were a garden. Barefoot. That is the thing I saw before I saw anything else, because it made no sense, and a rescue man's eye goes straight to the thing that makes no sense. Bare feet on broken concrete and glass and twisted steel, the surface that tears through the boots we pay good money for, and he stood on it the way you stand on grass. Dark hair, a short beard. His face was not the face from the holy cards in my mother's kitchen, not the pale European Christ with the light hair and the sad blue eyes. It was a face from somewhere the sun has always been hard, from the other side of the world in the beginning of it, a face that could have belonged to a man working the docks beside my father. His hands hung open at his sides, turned a little toward me, and on the inside of each wrist there was a mark, an old wound, healed, the kind of wound I have seen exactly once or twice in 30 years on bodies pulled from the worst of it. A wound that goes all the way through, and I, who have cataloged every way a human body can be broken, knew what made that kind of mark, and knew that no one lives through it. His eyes I am not going to try to describe because I have tried for 2 days and every word I reach for is too small, and I am not a man with many words to begin with. I will only tell you that I am the one who looks. In 30 years no scene has ever made me look away, and I looked into his eyes and I had to lower mine, the way you lower your eyes from the sun, not from fear, from something I do not have the word for. And then he spoke. And his voice did not come from in front of me, where he was standing. It came from inside my own chest, from underneath the breastbone, the place where I have carried the ledger for 30 years. And what he said was this. He said my name again. First, Wilmer. And then he said, not that one. Pull your men off the south wall, now. I want to stop and be a fire chief for 1 second, because this is where the chief in me cannot get past it. The building I had chosen, the one on the left, the loud one, the one the training told me to take, it had a facade still standing, a high wall on its south side that I had read in the half second I had to read it as the one stable element, the thing we could shelter under while we worked. Every instinct I have, paid for with 30 years and Eduardo Briseño's life, told me that wall was the safe part. And a barefoot man in a light with no source was telling me to pull my men back from the one thing I trusted. It went against everything. It went against the training I would have staked my life on, that I had staked Eduardo's life on. And I have asked myself 1,000 times in 2 days why I obeyed, why I did not freeze, why I did not write it off as the dust and the hours and a mind that had seen too much. And the only answer I have is that he said my name the way my mother said it, the way no one says it. And some part of me older than the training stood up and listened. I screamed at my men to come off the south wall. They looked at me like I had lost it. Rock, my second, actually stopped and said, "Comandante?" Because the south wall was where I had just told them to set up. And I screamed it again. Get back from the wall, all of you, now. And they came, because 30 years buys you that. They came, even not understanding. And we were maybe 4 meters back, no more, when the next aftershock hit, one of the 140, and the south wall, the stable one, the safe one, the one I would have put my men under, came straight down into the exact footprint where they had been standing. 3 stories of concrete into the space their bodies had filled 10 seconds before. The dust of it rolled over us. Rock was on the ground next to me with his hands over his head, and when it cleared, he looked at me and he could not speak, and neither could I. I turned back to the gap. He was still there. And he said, and I am giving you his words as close as my torn up memory can hold them, because I have repeated them to myself until they are the truest thing I own. He said, "The children are not in the loud building, Wilmer. They are under the stairs of the greenhouse, behind you. Go now, while there is still air." The greenhouse was the building on the right, the quiet one, the one the training told me to abandon, because there were fewer voices, because the math said you go where the most are. And there was a detail in what he said that I could not have known, and that takes the ground out from under every explanation I have tried to build since. Under the stairs. We had run a listening device along the front of the greenhouse in the first pass. A sensitive thing. It picks up a heartbeat through a meter of rubble, and it had read nothing. Nothing. We had marked it as a recovery, not a rescue, a place to come back for the dead. And he was telling me there were children alive under the stairs of a building my own equipment swore was silent. I am going to tell you what I did, and then I am going to tell you what happened, and you can do with it what you want, the way I have had to. I took my team into the greenhouse. I gave the order against the training, against the device, against the math, on the word of a barefoot man in a light I could not explain. And Roke did not argue this time. None of them argued. They had seen the south wall come down. We went in through what had been the back, into the collapsed stairwell, and we dug, by hand at first, then with the spreaders, into a place where every instrument we owned said there was no one. And under the stairs, in a pocket the collapse had left the way a closed hand leaves a hollow, we found 3 children, alive. 2 sisters and a little boy, the oldest maybe 9, covered in dust, holding on to each other, alive. The listening device had read nothing, because the concrete slab over them was angled in a way that bounced the sound, the technicians told me afterward. A freak of geometry, and I let them tell me that. I let them have their physics, because the physics is true. The slab did bounce the sound. But the physics does not explain how I knew to dig there. The physics does not explain the south wall. The physics does not explain a voice in my chest saying under the stairs about a building my machine had already written off as a grave. I carried the smallest one out myself, a boy. He weighed nothing. And somewhere between the stairwell and the open air, with that child against my chest and the dust in my throat, the thing happened that I cannot put into a report. The thing that my men looked at the ground when I tried to tell them. I felt heat. It started under the breastbone, the exact place his voice had come from, and it went up through my chest and out into my arms. And the weight, I have told you about the weight, the second skeleton, the ledger I have carried since 1999, every name in both columns, Eduardo, the 1,000th body, all of it, the weight came off me. Not the grief. I want to be precise, because precision is the last thing I have to offer this. The grief did not leave. The weight lifted. The way a load comes off your back when someone finally takes the other end of the stretcher. 27 years I had carried it alone in the dark, and now, for the first time, it was as if someone had reached down and taken the other end, and I stood in the dust with a living child in my arms, and I was crying. I, who had not cried since I was a boy, crying the way you cannot fake and cannot stop, from somewhere below the lungs. And I did not even know what I was saying until Roke told me after. I was saying over and over, I believe you, I believe you, I believe you. I did not decide to believe. I want that understood. I am not a man who decides things like that. I decide which wall is going to fall and which child I can reach. I did not reason my way to it, and I did not want it, and it would honestly be easier for me, professionally and every other way, if it had not happened. But it happened in my body, and my body is the one instrument I have trusted my whole life, and it told me the truth before my mind could argue. It was later, in the gray of the next morning, that someone put words to it for me. There's a chaplain who comes through these scenes, an old priest from one of the parishes, Father Guaira, going tent to tent, and he found me sitting on the bumper of a truck, unable to talk, and he did not push. He sat. And after a long time, because I had to say it to someone, I told him what I had seen, expecting him to do what people do, to soften it or explain it or pity me. He did not. He listened the way you listen to a structure, with his whole attention, and when I was done he was quiet, and then he told me there was a man in the Bible like me, a soldier. A centurion, he said, a man of rank, a man with men under him who went where he pointed. And this man had come to Jesus about a servant who was dying. And Jesus had said he would come to the house. And the centurion had said, "No, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof. Only say the word and my servant will be healed." Because the centurion understood command. He understood that a man with real authority does not need to be present to be obeyed. He only has to say the word, and the thing is done. And Father Guaira said that Jesus had marveled at that man, a soldier, an outsider, and said he had not found such faith in all of Israel. I had to ask him to tell it twice, because I am a man who gives the word and watches men move on it. I have spent 30 years saying go and watching them go, saying come off the wall and watching them come. And a voice had said to me, pull your men off the south wall. Only the word, no hand on my shoulder, no proof, only the word. And I had obeyed it the way I expect to be obeyed, and the wall had come down where my men had been. I understood that centurion better than I have ever understood anyone in a book. Only say the word. I did not know the words were in there. I had never opened it. I told Father Guaira that, and he smiled, a tired smile. And he said most of the men he meets who finally understand that passage are exactly the ones who never read it. I have to tell you the cost, because the men who tell these stories without the cost are lying, and I have done enough hiding of bodies behind clean reports. We did not save everyone. We could not. That is the whole shape of this work, and this was the worst of it I have ever seen. The loud building, the one on the left, the one I had been about to commit my whole team to, there were people in it too, and we got to some of them later, and some of them we did not, and I will carry that. the ones in the loud building the rest of my life, the way I carry all of them. And it is worse than that, because I have to be honest, my own son, Aníbal. His crew was 30 minutes out that first night coming up from another command, and they took the eastern grid. And on the second night, a building shifted under his team, and one of his men, a friend of his, did not come home. And I was not there. I was in Cachulamar pulling children out of a greenhouse on the word of a vision, while my son lost a man on a street I could not get to. He has not said a word to me about it. He does not have to. I taught him this ledger. I handed it to him with my own hands. And there is one more cost, and I might as well say it because it is going to come out anyway. There are people now, good people, my own institution, doing their jobs the way I would do mine, asking why the Comandante pulled a team off a secured position and committed them to a structure that the listening equipment had cleared. There is going to be a review. There may be an investigation. On paper, what I did was abandon a high probability rescue for a structure my own instruments said was empty, on no recorded basis, and two of the choices I made that night cost time that other teams might have used elsewhere, and a man can build a case out of that. I am recording this 2 days later, not knowing how that case ends. I cannot put in a report that a barefoot man with scars on his wrist told me where the children were. I know exactly how that reads. I have read enough reports to know that the truth, this once, is the one thing I cannot write down. And I have spent my whole life believing that the physical world leaves evidence. And now I am the man holding the one piece of evidence I am not allowed to enter, which is 3 living children who were under the stairs of a building my machine swore was a grave. So I am recording this on the 26th of June in a storage room behind the bay on a crate of Spanish water with the radio I cannot turn off and the floor moving under me every few minutes, and I do not know what happens when I stop. I do not know how I face the review. I do not know how I face my son. I do not know how I ever read a structure again the same way, when the thing that saved my men was the one order that every instinct I own told me not to give. But I know what happened in that gap, and I am a fire chief. And a fire chief who finds something that breaks the procedure does not get to pretend he never saw it. He has to call it in. So I am calling it in. I want to say 3 things to 3 people before I stop. To the men and women who do this work, the bomberos, the rescue crews, the ones who run in, the ones keeping the ledger I kept, I know what it costs you to choose. I know about the second column. I am only telling you that the night I stood between 2 collapses and could not choose, something chose with me and called me by my name, and I did not earn it, and I cannot explain it, and I am not going to pretend it away to keep my reputation. To everyone who lost someone on this coast, in this earthquake, or back in 1999 under that mountain, and who closed the door on God the way I did, and has kept it shut for 27 years. I held that door shut longer than almost anyone, and harder. I am not here to argue you out of your grief. I am only telling you that the room you have decided is empty may not be empty, and I would not have believed that either 3 days ago. And to anyone who has built a whole life the way I built mine, on only ever trusting what you can read, what you can measure, what your own hands can prove, I am not asking you to stop reading the structure. I read structures for 30 years and they kept men alive. I am only asking you to consider that the thing your instruments cannot hear might still be down there in the dark, alive, under the stairs, knowing your name. So let me ask you what I have been asking myself for 2 days in this room. If you were standing where I stood, between two voices, with the dust coming and the dark coming, and only the time it takes to draw one breath, and something you could not explain called you by your name and told you to go against everything you knew, would you have listened? Would you have pulled your men off the wall? Tell me. I will be reading. I am not sleeping much these days anyway.
3 children came out from under the stairs of a building that every instrument on the scene had marked as a grave. A wall that a 30-year veteran trusted with his men's lives came down into the space their bodies had filled 10 seconds before they were pulled back. And a man who had not prayed since he buried a firefighter he sent up a sound staircase to die, stood in the dust of the worst night of his life and wept, and could not stop saying 3 words, I believe you. Wilmer Salazar is still on that coast as we publish this. The aftershocks are still coming. The review he spoke of has not yet happened. He does not know how it ends, whether the call he made in the dark, the one that saved his men and found those children, will cost him the career he has left, because the only honest account of why he made it is the one account he cannot put in a report. He is living now in the narrow space between 2 things that are both true and do not fit, that he did his work the way 30 years taught him to, and that the thing which finally saved his men was the single order all of that training told him not to give. We do not ask you to explain that. He cannot either, and he is the one who lived it. We only ask you, if this testimony moved you, to do a few small things so that the next one reaches you and reaches the people who need it most. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell so you do not miss what comes next. And if you want to stand a little closer to this work, you can join as a member through the link below. It is what lets us keep finding these stories and telling them the way they deserve to be told, without cutting away from the hard parts. And if this story left you with more than you can put down tonight, you should know it is not the only one. We have gathered 100 accounts like Wilmer's, soldiers and mothers, pilots and prisoners, people on every side of every line, all describing the same dark-haired man, the same scarred wrists, the same name spoken first, each in their own language, into a book called Real Encounters. The link and the QR code are on your screen and in the pinned comment below. If even one of these accounts has ever made you stop and wonder, it is worth your evening. There are more of these than you would think. People who walked toward the screaming on the worst night of their lives and came back changed and never told a soul because they knew exactly how it would sound. We are going to keep finding them. Stay with us. We will see you in the next one.